Juice is taking the position that humans are carnivores and Footsoldier's taking the opposition. The winner will be based upon who concedes or the popular vote of the audience that was here for at least 75% of the debate. So thank you both for debating. You can get started.
Excellent. So, Pickle, do you have anything prepared as an opening statement, or because I've got something prepared? Otherwise, if you don't, and I can go straight off the bat if you like. Well, have you got anything written down?
Well, what I have is basically I plan to go over what the definition of carnivore really is, and so go down since it's like more detailed, like actually read the whole Wikipedia page, not the whole thing, but like read the most important parts and just break down really why humans can be classified as carnivores. That was my plan.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Well, if you were just gonna sort of go through the Wikipedia page, I've got some interesting things that might anticipate some of the things that you're about to say there. So I've prepared something small. So if you don't mind, maybe I'll just read that first. It will take, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes, I guess, to go through that, and that might anticipate some of the things that you're going to get into anyway, and so we
All
might
right.
close off some avenues right off the bat, because
All right.
this is a bit of a contentious one, because right off the bat I was like, yeah, that's an indefensible proposition, but then I was thinking about it more, and I was thinking, yeah, actually, if you had proprietary definitions and did sorts of weird acrobatics with biological terminology, you could probably squeeze a carnivore position. But I just want to close off some of those things. So let's get into it. I've got a statement, an introductory statement. So let's get into it. So there are two types of carnivores: obligate carnivores and facultative carnivores. Generally, when we use the word carnivore, we're referring to obligate carnivores, which describes organisms that require exclusively meat for sustenance and cannot eat a carbohydrate-rich diet, as their digestive system is unable to extract adequate nutrition from plant matter, and they will die. So some carnivores might eat grass or other plant matter, but this is not in order to extract nutrients from it, but more as for a mechanical function of the digestive tract, inducing vomiting or cleaning the digestive tract in some way, but it's not really to extract nutrition. So the less commonly understood type of carnivore is the facultative carnivore. So dogs are actually not omnivores, and they're actually facultative carnivores. This is because, despite the fact that they've got the ability to digest a moderate amount of carbohydrate, they require taurine, vitamin D, and other nutrients, arginine, for example, to do so. So they need animal sources of nutrients. Otherwise, they can't, which they can't synthesize intrinsically. Otherwise, they can't digest the carbohydrate. So actually, they can't eat a 100% plant-based diet unless it's supplemented synthetically, or a really bizarre version of a diet that with seaweed and mushrooms that have been exposed to UV light, and obviously unnatural diets for a dog. So, if a facultative carnivore such as a dog is fed a plant-based diet to the exclusion of all animal-based foods, it will just become sick and eventually die. So that's why it's a facultative carnivore, not an omnivore. So humans routinely obtain all of their nutrition needs from a plant-based diet. Um, to the exclusion of animal foods. And not only do we not suffer ill effects, we generally improve our health by doing so. If we eat an exclusively meat based diet, humans can die of various diseases, including but not limited to scurvy. There are modern day advocates of a carnivore way of eating that seem to avoid illness by consuming small amounts of plant matter supplements by eating disproportionately large amounts of organ meat than would be viable in nature. This seems to be a very experimental group of fringe dieters, and many of them become ill, and the sustainability of this is at best unknown, but more likely totally unsustainable in the long term from a health perspective. From the experiments that I've seen, blood markers generally deteriorate quite rapidly on carnivore diet. So it's impossible to develop hypercholesterolemia as a true carnivore, yet humans develop this all the time from eating meat, and it goes away when we revert to our natural plant-based diet. So just to close off a couple of doors to misleading pathways, the mere ability to eat meat if the mere ability to eat meat will constitute being a carnivore, then horses would also have to be considered carnivores because they can too eat meat. If you just Google videos of horses eating birds, etc., you'll see that horses can eat meat. So if horses are carnivores, then that's a reductio of the position. And if we're going to use technical terminology in a misleading way, such as terms like hypocarnivore and mesocarnivore, then this also leads us to define a vegan as a carnivore, which would also be a reductio in itself of such a pathway, because that would just be completely absurd and contrary to common sense. So to cap that off, to summarize, both types of carnivore diet. To summarize, both types of carnivore diet, they will die if they eat a plant-based diet, right? So you've got the facultative and you've got the obligate carnivores. They will both die if they eat a 100% plant-based diet, whereas humans do not die but thrive. Humans die if they eat a natural carnivore diet, but carnivores obviously thrive. It's impossible to develop hypocholesterolemia as a carnivore, yet humans develop this from eating meat all the time, and it goes away when we revert to our natural plant-based diet. If ability to eat meat constitutes carnivory, then horses are carnivores, and misleading definitions result in vegans being carnivores, which is also would be a reductio to that position. So they're the main points that I've prepared, and I anticipated that you might go down some of those routes. So is that some of the places that you were going to go?
Yeah, that is, a relevant thing, but it doesn't quite address everything that I might say.
Okay. Well, I'm
So,
interested in hearing what position you take then.
all right, I'm just gonna go down like the whole list, like I was gonna do. So
Okay.
starting at the top with the basic definition, a carnivore is an animal whose food and energy requirements derive solely from animal tissue or meat. So when you have this definition, it automatically fits humans in there because our food and energy requirements, what we require for food and energy, technically, the only food group that we could eat if we were to only eat one food group would actually be meat or animal products in general, or just meat if you include like organ meats and all of that. So we only would require that. And in fact, even though it's possible for humans to be vegan in the modern day with modern agriculture and supplements, basically because of modern technology, it's possible to cheat nature to be vegan. Basically, if you think about it, in our actual environment that we would have existed in throughout the most of our existence as a species, it was completely the other way around. If we were going to choose one between plants and animal foods to cut out completely, it would have to be the plants, because without like outsourcing and without modern agriculture to produce all these genetically cultivated plants that have been altered by humans, and without the supplements, the only way to get all of your essential nutrients would be with meat, to at least include it in your diet. But more so, humans fit the definition of carnivores, this first definition here, like right from the beginning, because all we would actually require would be meat. We'd actually be able to survive without plants, and it wouldn't be the other way around. It's only the other way around now because, like I said, of modern technology and whatnot. And
Okay. So
while
so
it's
so
true,
would you? Yeah.
it's true that humans wouldn't be in perfect health that way, but it seems to be in perfect health. We do need plant foods, but it could also be argued that to be in perfect health, we actually do need animal foods as well. And even if we don't completely, even if we don't need animal foods, the definitions for carnivore, since there is no real solid definition for these things. Like there are definitions for a carnivore that could include an animal that technically could survive if you cheat nature without eating meat. Like, for instance, cats we know are obligate carnivores, and there are people who attempt to feed their cats vegan, and even if it doesn't work out, in the long term, health wise, the cats can at least survive for a time that way. And the same thing goes for humans who are vegan. There's like no actual evidence that a human can go from being a literal baby throughout their whole life and be healthy as a vegan, because who can you point to as an example who's literally been vegan their whole life? So a
Yeah,
dog or a cat.
I can point to multiple examples. I interviewed one lady on my channel who her YouTube handle was born vegan because she was literally born vegan, and I don't know how old she is. I'm assuming she's like mid-20s or something, and she's a vegan advocate, and she's really healthy, uh, into sport, and uh, yeah, really healthy. Great example of a healthy, thriving human being who's been vegan from birth.
Like, well, maybe that's true, and I I personally haven't ever heard of any till now though who've actually been vegan like their whole lives.
Well, I just told you one. Like, I interviewed her on my channel. I can give you the link to the video if you like.
All right, yeah, I can watch that later.
Yeah, I'll do it after the debate because I'm on my phone right now, so it's sort of a bit awkward to get it. But if you Google my channel, Footsoldier, vegan Footsoldier, born vegan, you'll find an interview. I think it's about an hour long, and we cover a lot of how a lot of people, how when she was raised, a lot of people said she would die if she didn't eat meat, or she would get nutrient deficiencies and all this sort of stuff. And she just proved to everyone, no, that's nonsense. You keep saying though that we can cheat nature and do X, Y, and Z, and yeah, cheat nature and be vegan. But what do you really mean by that? What nutrients are completely devoid uh, in plant foods that are essential to human nutrition?
Well, obviously, the first thing that you have to think about is sourcing, because there are, maybe you can get literally every single nutrient somehow from plants, but can you do that in any climate? Like, can a human feasibly do that before agriculture, before like exporting existed? Like, there's no way that all of those kinds of sources would exist in one environment to make that feasible. But what would exist for humans throughout the whole, like almost the whole 200,000 years of our history, would be meat and organs. So in nature, a human would only be able to survive on meat if, for whatever reason, they had to choose between only meat or only plants.
What
And it's
about our frugivorous ancestors and where we evolved from? We evolved from well, back in the day, the trees, eating fruit mostly and small insects. So frugivores who eat insects are still generally deemed um, frugivores. They're not deemed carnivores because they eat few insects. Generally carnivores, and I don't even have to debate whether humans are herbivores or frugivores or starchivores or omnivores. I don't care about any of that because the proposition is carnivore, right? So in the classic definition of carnivore, we're talking about um, an organism that gets the majority or generally exclusively their calories from flesh, right? So a frugivore doesn't match that description at all, and that's all of our ancestors, pretty much. Not all of them, obviously, but I mean our closest ancestors are frugivorous, right, or close to frugivorous. Do you disagree with that?
Well, first of all, I would say that there are definitions of carnivore which actually include animals that eat mostly plants. And also, that actually leads into the next thing I would have said, because on the outside, humans do resemble most of the traits of us that resemble frugivores or herbivores are external traits, and it's true that we're descended from that, but at the same time, internally, we're actually more like our digestive system resembles that of a carnivore more, and it's because we aren't the kind of carnivore that evolved to hunt things with our fangs and claws. We're the kind of carnivore that started eating insects as a herbivore, then we started scavenging, and eventually, based on our tool use and communication capabilities and things, other than fangs and claws that we evolved to be able to utilize, we evolved from scavengers to actual apex predators, and we adapted to that over the course of millions of years, whereas we only adapted to a diet that is as high in sugar and grains and plant foods for a relatively much shorter span of time, only like 12,000 years.
Okay.
And
Well,
and our stomach acid, human stomach acid, like carnivores, they, like obligate carnivores, they have like a pH of like 1 or 2 for their stomach pH when they're digesting their food. For humans, it varies because we're like facultative carnivores when we're in our natural environment, and that's what we adapted to. So we have like a pH that can range from like 2 to 4, whereas a real dedicated herbivore, their pH would be like 6 or less. Like
yeah, you
they
do know
literally,
that the pH scale is logarithmic, though, right? Do you know what that means? So
yeah,
the increase from 2 to 1 is a lot more than the increase from 3 to 2, right? So I've heard some people try and argue this before, but if you take all of the factors in, if you cherry pick one factor, then you can argue something. But if you look at all of the factors, um, our stomach pH, and also our urine pH, and also the fact that we don't have claws or fangs, and also the length of the digestive system, and also the
yeah, the
transit
length of
time,
our
and
digestive
also the
system, that's a
microbiome,
perfect point,
uh,
because in
right, and
reality, our digestive
also
system,
no, the digestive tract is more in line with the herbivore. You can see on Frank Tofano's blog or something some comparison that makes a comparison between a human and a lion, but it's just misleading and delusional. If you actually go through the comparisons and look at all of the different comparisons, you'll see that although you might be able to cherry pick one here or there, the general gist of it is very, very much in line with that of a frugivore. It's not 100. We're not like horses, right? We're not herbivores in that sense. We don't have 4 stomachs like a cow or something like that, right? But we're closest to a frugivore in our anatomy. So if you're going to argue that we're closest to a lion or something like this, I would just say that you're delusional at that point. We can unpack that and get into it. But I
this
wanted
this
to.
is what I would have to say, is that a obligate carnivore, as I understand it, their small intestines would be around 3 times their body length, whereas a dedicated herbivore like a cow, their small intestine would be like 12 times their body length, and a human, it varies, but ours are like 4 or 5 times, which makes us much closer to carnivores.
Um, as I say, you can cherry pick a couple. I'm just looking at the comparison now. So we've got carnivores. What was the digestive tract length on here? So we can look at the digestive tract transit time, complete digestion in 2 to 4 hours for a carnivore. An omnivore, complete digestion in 6 to 10 hours. A herbivore, such as a horse, 24 to 48 hours. Frugivore is 12 to 18 hours. And human is 12 to 18 hours. So again, we're closest to a frugivore. We can, yeah, we can make comparisons to frugivores all day long. We can say we have, yeah, hands and fingers. We walk upright. we have canine. We have like rudimentary blunt canines. We have flattened incisors. We have flattened molars. We got a ball joint in our jaw, where a carnivore has open and shut only. We don't have. We chew our food. We don't shear our food. We have large saliva glands. We have alkaline saliva with certain enzymes in there. We have slightly more alkaline urine, whereas a carnivore has very acidic urine. We do not secrete uricase. We've got a weak hydrochloric acid in our stomach. We require fiber to have correct transit in our digestive system, in our digestive tract. We can metabolize small amounts of cholesterol and vitamin A, otherwise we get overdoses. We get hypercholesterolemia, or we can get retinol overload. We have sweat glands in all of our body rather than just in our tongue. We have intestines are approximately about 9 times the body length, and the frugivore is about 9 times the body length. The colon, the comparisons are very, very close to a frugivore and very, very far apart to a lion. You can look at all of the infographics you like. You can look at the infographics on Frank Tufano's blog, but they're just not going to reflect reality. If you look at the actual comparisons, we're a lot closer to a frugivore than we are to a lion, or even to a horse. Horses have slight differences, not slight differences, large differences as well. So we're divergent to horses, and we're also very divergent to carnivores like lions. That's why humans are the closest to frugivores. So if you want to go down an anatomical pathway, then you can just see that you'd be delusional if you argued that any further. I wanted to make a point, though, when you said about the nutrients and if we had to pick vegetables over meat and stuff like this, we can't ignore the fact that carnivores do not get hypercholesterolemia, whereas humans do, right? You cannot induce hypercholesterolemia in a carnivore, yet you induce it all of the time in a herbivore or in a frugivore, right? It happens all the time. Herbivore it happens, carnivore it doesn't. The only way you can induce a cholesterol which is too high in the carnivore is by chopping out their thyroid gland, because that down regulates cholesterol regulation, right? So from an anatomical point of view, you don't have a leg to stand on. From an internal, like the cholesterol point of view, you don't have a leg to stand on. From the vitamin A regulation, you don't have a leg to stand on. If you're going to say that we're a facultative carnivore and not an obligate carnivore, okay, that's maybe slightly less delusional to argue for. But then the definition of a facultative carnivore, something like a dog, it can digest starch like we can digest starch, but it can only do so contingent on animal nutrients like taurine, like arginine, like retinol, vitamin D, that it needs to get from the animal foods. Otherwise, it can't digest the starch. But whereas we can digest all the starch we want intrinsically without extrinsic nutrients. So in terms of arguing that we're facultative carnivores, we just don't meet the definition for that. Now we can argue that we're meso-carnivores or hypo-carnivores or some random definition like that. But by that definition, you could argue that vegans are carnivores, which is just batshit crazy.
Well, you can argue the credibility of those, definitions of carnivore, the hyper carnivore, meso carnivore, hypo carnivore, but those I would say are actually more accurate because they seem to look at things as more of a spectrum, which I would say is actually technically more what things are like, which also goes into the anatomy points you were making, saying that humans resemble a frugivore more than an obligate carnivore. Well, that's actually true, but what you're really saying is that we resemble an omnivore, like we resemble being in the middle more than we resemble being at either extreme, but you're making it look like we're closer to herbivore. You're saying frugivore, but you're trying to make it look like we're closer to herbivores when in reality we're further away from a cow than we are from a lion probably, but yes, we are closer to like a carnivore leaning omnivore is also descended from frugivores. You know what I mean?
Well, look, I don't have to argue that humans are cows, right? I just have to resist you establishing that humans are carnivores, right? So
Well, it's a spectrum. Like on one end, if you have lions, and on the other end, you have cows. First of all, there like you're right. Yes, there is no not a carnivore, because even if you're 1% a carnivore, if you turn it into a spectrum, then you're in a way like you're part carnivore. So yes, you're a carnivore in that sense. But
right, yeah, but before you go any further, do you want me to send you a video of a horse eating a bird? Because I can do so, and then
I know about that. I've seen
right,
that kind of stuff. Like
right, right,
I know that
right,
all herbivores almost are capable of eating some kind of animal product and vice versa.
right. So by this logic, then, if we agree on this, right, then by your definition of hypocarnivore, necessarily. Oh, one second. Yeah, okay, I'm back. So yeah, so if we agree on that, by your definition, if you're going to say that humans are hypocarnivores, not hypo, that meaning they eat a little bit of meat or they eat some up to 30% or something like this, then you would also commit yourself to arguing that horses are hypocarnivores. So if you commit yourself that horses are carnivores, I think you'll just have to that will just be the reductio of the debate, and then it would be game over for your position, right?
Well, if you accept that like carnivore and herbivore and omnivore are just like classifications essentially that humans have made up. We can't exactly shove everything into a box and say carnivore, omnivore, herbivore, and say that's just what it is. Like there are gray areas. So it's more accurate to look at things like a spectrum. And when you look at things like a spectrum in the wild, like literally in the wild, the human organism has historically always lived on animal products to get its main essential nutrients, and required those foods. It's the food and energy requirements did derive mainly from meat, but in a way solely from meat. Like the requirement derived solely from meat in a way, because it is the only food group that you can eat and get every essential nutrient. You can't do that with grains, you can't do that with fruit, you can't do that with vegetables. You have to not only eat a variety of them, but you also have to literally use supplements in most cases, and just go into a realm that just doesn't exist in a human's natural environment. So only by all these innovations that we've made as a modern society is it even possible for a human to be vegan.
Well, look, it's possible to be vegan. Of course, you've got like indigenous people and lentil farmers, for example, who eat mainly lentils, and you've got people who uh, forage and stuff like this. But that's getting a bit off track. Although there's examples of this, I can even just agree that they're fringe examples, but that's not really necessary or important to argue right now. I think where we're at in this debate is if you want to say that the ability to eat meat or the presence of meat in the diet is a spectrum of carnivory, then we can say that humans are carnivores, but at the same time, we would have to be committing ourselves to saying that horses are carnivores. And if we say that horses are carnivorous,
Doesn't even
then
matter. Even if everything is a carnivore, if every animal is a carnivore, then humans are carnivores. Therefore, I win.
no, because if we say that everything is a carnivore, then what you've done is you've redefined the word carnivore in a way which is absurd and wouldn't be accepted by the majority of people who hear the word carnivore. Because if I said to 100 people, is a horse a carnivore? They'll say no, right? So no one, if I went to 100 biologists, not even 100 people on the street, 100 biologists and said, is a horse a carnivore? They would laugh at you and say, no, it's not, right? So if we're going to do this little tap dance and redefine
It's not a tap
every
dance.
organism,
Technically, humans fit both definitions of carnivores. If you define it as an animal whose food and energy requirements derive solely from animal tissue, then
well,
humans,
that's not fitting of a human. But even ignoring that,
it
even
is
granting
fitting.
everything, even
Humans can only survive in nature if you had to choose between plants and animals. The only way would be animals because that's the only way you could get
nonsense.
all the essential nutrients in a
It's just
natural
not.
environment.
It's just nonsense. And you failed earlier to name the essential nutrients we wouldn't be able to get. But we don't even need to go there because all I'm going to say right now, we've got to the point where I see where you're going with this, and I already anticipated this in my opening statement. So, where we're going with this right now is if you are about to define everything as a carnivore to include humans into this carnivore category in order for you to get your proposition over the line. Well, what you're going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, by this proprietary definition, you've now included humans in the set of things that you are calling a carnivore, in addition to horses and potentially cows, right? So we've now got classic herbivores in your carnivore definition, in your set of carnivores.
What it
It
would
is
really
horses
be
and
is that
cows.
they'd be
So
this
so
much
no, let me
percent
finish. Let me
herbivore,
finish, man.
this much percent carnivore based on where they fall on the spectrum.
Yeah, but look, let's just continue my train of thought here. If your set of carnivores includes cows and horses, right? Then congratulations, you've created a set called carnivore and put these objects within that set. However, I don't acknowledge this set as being the same thing that I talk about or anyone else talks about for that matter when we use the word carnivore. So you've created a set. Congratulations. But now the the authenticity or the authority of this set, you've got no it's like I'm just saying I can create a proposition saying that I can fly to the moon, right? And then I argue in the debate by what I mean by flying to the moon is actually tying up my shoelace, right? And so you agree. I say, okay, if you mean by flying to the moon that you can tie your shoelace, and you can tie your shoelace, I will grant you that. I'm not going to say that you're a liar. I believe that you can tie your shoelace. Well, congratulations, you can fly to the moon in this proprietary language. But then in terms of the actual original proposition, I'm not going to grant you that that proposition is true because it doesn't cohere, it doesn't correspond to my understanding of the words in a non proprietary sense. Now, if you had said in advance that I have a proprietary meaning of the word carnivore, which actually includes horses, I would have said, okay, well good luck to you. But that wasn't given in advance. So then, although I can understand now what you're saying by your definition of carnivore, which includes horses, I'm not going to acknowledge that that is a legitimate use of the word carnivore in the context of this debate. Because if you asked 100 biologists if a horse was a carnivore, they'd all tell you no.
The definition of a herbivore is an animal anatomically and physiologically adapted to eating plant material for the main component of its diet. So
Yeah, that's given.
that overlaps with valid, actual, recognized definitions of a carnivore, and you make it seem like the percentage based definitions there's some fringe thing, but you're actually like framing it that way. There's no like consensus that those ones are bullshit. It's just like a less common way of thinking about it because it's less convenient. because it's more technical, but it's
Okay, well,
actually more correct because that's the way things work. There's no only eating plants box, only eating meat box, eating in the middle box. No, it's a spectrum. You know what I mean? Like that.
right.
And
I can grant that there's some overlap, but let me ask you a question. Can you have such thing as a herbivorous carnivore?
you can, because you can have an animal that fits the definition of a hypocarnivore, but also fits the definition of a herbivore because it eats plants for the main component of its diet.
Right. So as I said, I already acknowledged that in my opening statement that would be a reductio of the proposition, right, or of the debate. Because if you're going to argue that you're committed to saying that a horse is a carnivore and a herbivorous carnivore, right? So if you're going to come up with something that's a herbivorous carnivore, then I would just say that's absurdity, because what you've now
It's not
done.
absurd in a spectrum. It's only absurd if you try to make it like a black and white box.
Right, no, but if you're going to come up, right, so typically, if we're going to say that something's a herbivore, something's a carnivore, and you're going to argue that something that we typically call herbivorous or omnivorous is actually a carnivore, then we're acknowledging that these separate categories exist, right, tacitly. So if you're going to come and say, no, you can have an omnivorous herbivorous carnivore, then I'm just going to say you're using proprietary language, or you're delusional, or you're chatting bullshit, right? You can't be using the common definitions as understood by biologists, as understood by everyone who would have this conversation with you, but
Biologists
use proprietary
understand that
language.
these are just arbitrary things that we came up with. Like, we use them for convenience, but there's no objective, clear cut. This is exactly how much you need to eat to be considered a carnivore, and this is exactly how much plants you need to eat to be an herbivore. That doesn't exist.
Right.
What
Just
exists
like
is the spectrum.
just like yeah, just like almost everything else in life. So what constitutes, like many things, what constitutes theft, what constitutes rape, what constitutes murder, what constitutes all of these things, right? So if I accidentally kill someone whilst driving, is that murder? No, it's not. But what if I drank one glass of alcohol? Is that murder? No, it's not. What if I drank 2 glasses of alcohol? No, it's not. What if I drank 3? Oh, maybe it is murder then at this point. Okay, what if I drank 2.5? Or I don't know. When's the line, right? So there's these hazy things with everything in life, with ethics, with defining
And so what
activities,
you're
and
getting to is that what
what
we
is sex,
agree
for example.
upon is the one that's objective, because that's what it has to be, just because we agree on it.
Right, but for example, what is sex, right? If I touch someone's leg, is that sex? Probably not. But if I thrust my penis inside them, is that sex? Probably, right? That's definitely sex, right? So there's, although there's this sort of like grey area from touching someone's leg to thrusting your penis inside them, there's some point at which that becomes, from non-sex it becomes sex, right? There's some point where it crosses that line. But if we walk into a room and see a man on top of a woman thrusting her, we're going to say, oh, he's having sex, sorry, and walk out the room, or whatever whatever would happen
So
in
you,
that
so you can
situation.
try to
But we would be
define
like,
where that line is
we would say that's, it would
when
say
it
that's
comes to
clearly.
human diet, but that would be no less arbitrary than what you're claiming.
Yeah, but when
The
you walk in a room, look, when you walk in a room and you see that, you're like, oh, that's obviously someone having sex. So when you see a cow or a horse, you say, oh, that's obviously a herbivore. And when you see a lion, it's like, oh, that's obviously a lion. So that there are, although there are grey lions everywhere in the world, everywhere you look in the
so
world,
so
there are going to
because
be
the
grey
average
lions.
person doesn't know how to break down on every level, like the technical way that the difference between omnivore, herbivore, and carnivore, because they don't understand that, and they just think that it is, that whatever is commonly, used to classify something, that's just what it is to the average person, because they don't know the technical science behind it. That means that that's what's correct.
I'm saying that in life, in the world that we live in, There's grey areas to everything. I've just given you a few examples, but what I'll make an analogy to is what you're trying to argue here. So I'm saying, look at a lion, which is analogous to, I just walked in and I can see that someone's having sex, versus look at this. You're saying, like, look at this herbivorous horse, which would be analogous to, that person touched someone's leg, therefore they're having sex. Most people are going to say, if you touch someone's leg, that's not having sex, right? But if you're fully on top of them, thrusting inside them, that's probably having sex, right? So
Touching
I
someone's
know.
leg is not having sex at all, but eating meat is eating meat at all. So even if 1% of your diet is meat, then you're eating meat. So it's not the same thing.
Well, I'm just talking about psoriasis paradoxes, right? So I'm talking about if there's a little bit of something, or like, where is the line? But although there's some sort of blurred line, there is one side of the line which is obviously not X, and there's the other side of the line which obviously is X. So in the terms of the herbivore carnivore situation, you've got one side of the line which is obviously a horse is obviously not a carnivore. And the other side of the line is a lion is obviously a carnivore. We know what carnivore means when it's applied to a lion. We know what herbivore means when it's applied to a horse. So if you're going to come up to me in this debate and say that horse is a carnivore, I'm just going to say, well, then you've lost the debate because you're chatting nonsense. You're not making any sense.
Not really, because if a horse eats any amount of meat, then it is in part like a tiny fraction of its diet is carnivorous, making it on the spectral way of thinking about it, which is accurate. The spectrum of like how the ratio of how much meat to plants you eat, like there is part of their diet which is carnivorous, therefore they're partially carnivorous or partially a carnivore or just
Right. Well,
are a
if we do that, then we can just say, well, animal food. What is animal food? Sources of nutrition that derive from animals. Insects are animals. Cows eat grass. Grass has insects on it. Cows eat insects on a daily basis. So every day, cows eat animal food. So cows are carnivores. So if you're going to say that cows are carnivores based on your definition,
Yeah,
then you've
if you have to choose one, obviously you're going to call a cow or a horse a herbivore and a lion a carnivore because they lean to that side of the spectrum. But it doesn't mean that there's no spectrum there, and it doesn't even matter because I'm not even arguing that humans are mostly herbivorous but still carnivores, because I think that when in our natural environment we always actually leaned carnivore. And if you look at which definition is true based on like the sole nutrient and energy requirements, we actually lean more to being carnivores and are only capable, like I've said, of being vegan by literally like just fucking nature in every hole simultaneously, basically.
Well, look, even if humans eat, in our evolutionary history, ate animal food every day, cows eat animal food every day. They eat insects, and frugivores eat insects. But we don't call cows or frugivores carnivores. As you're saying, there is some sort of spectrum. A lion's on one side, a cow's on the other. Humans don't fall on the lion spectrum. There are many reasons why. I've named quite a few in this debate, but what you're trying to do is not to argue that, well, there's a spectrum, but we're really close to lions because of this and that. What you're actually trying to do is pull up the
Our
definition.
digestive system is objectively closer to that of a lion's than that of a ruminant's, and it's a false
No, it's not.
dichotomy to compare frugivores to lions, because the
No,
real
look,
opposite ends of the
no,
spectrum
that's a
would
straw
be
man.
ruminants versus obligate
That's no,
carnivores.
look, stop. That's a straw man. I'm not arguing that we are
You
anatomically
literally
similar
said
to a
that
cow.
you literally said that we're more herbivorous. Basically, you were arguing that we were frugivores, but that's the wrong thing to compare it to, because you're using the most extreme end of the carnivore spectrum and saying, yeah, we're not carnivores because we're closer to this thing that's kind of in the middle, but the real comparison to draw would be between lions and cows or something. And
No,
our
frugivores
digestive
are
system is
all
way, way closer to a lion's.
frugivory. No, look, frugivory is a subset of herbivory. Are you disagreeing with that?
It can also be like classified in with omnivory and carnivory, like they can overlap.
No, it can't.
Yes, it
No, no
can. It's a
frugivore is a
spectrum, and they
carnivore.
overlap.
No
There's no
frugivore is a
clear cut.
carnivore. If you're
There's
going to
no clear
argue,
cut.
if dude, wait, this is getting me silly. If you're arguing that frugivores can be carnivores, then you're either delusional or you're using proprietary language. Which is
I'm
it?
not using proprietary language. I'm telling you
So
that
then you're
technically
delusional.
it's a fucking spectrum. No, it's technically a spectrum. It's the ratio between what kinds of food you're eating, plant to animal, and you fall somewhere in a spectrum based on that. And humans falling somewhere in the middle or leaning sort of carnivore, even leaning sort of herbivore. No matter where they fall, they're definitely not obligate carnivores, and they're definitely not like ruminant herbivores, but we fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, meaning that some part of our diet is carnivorous. And since there's no clear cut, like, point where you separate herbivores from omnivores from carnivores, there is none. The technical way to look at it is as a spectrum, and in the spectrum, things can overlap because there's just no one thing that we are.
Right. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I don't like about what you just said. One of them, you say that there's a spectrum, and cows are on the extreme end, and lions are on the other. Well, lions are the cats are pretty much the main obligate carnivores on the planet, whereas herbivores, it's not like a cow is on one end and that's the most herbivorous herbivore out there. There's many different kinds of herbivores. In fact, herbivores are the largest amount of animals by diet on the planet, right? There's far more herbivores than there are carnivores. And so there's a huge diversity of herbivores, not just cows and horses and animals with multiple stomachs. No, of course not. There's many herbivores with single stomachs. There's many herbivores that are quite similar to humans. And frugivores are the subset of herbivores, right? So, or you can argue that they're slightly different, but some people argue that it's in the category of herbivore. And so the spectrum, I can even grant you that there's some type of spectrum. But if you're going to say that any ability to to eat meat or any amount of meat that you eat automatically makes you a carnivore and not an omnivore or a herbivore that has just occasionally, like a horse ate a bird once or a cow eats some ants whilst eating grass, or this sort of thing. We are arguing that horses and cows are now carnivores and dogs are now carnivores, and everything in the world basically is now a carnivore. Then you're using proprietary language or are delusional. That and I'm not gonna concede that to the debate proposition that humans are carnivores based upon misleading language or proprietary language or a delusion.
Well, even if I conceded to everything you just said, which I don't, it doesn't change the fact that in their natural environment, the ratio of plant to animal foods that human beings tend to consume in the wild and seem to have consumed all throughout human history before the invention of agriculture was a ratio which corresponds with that of a facultative carnivore.
Do you have evidence to support that assertion?
The evidence mainly is that the capability to have a diet anywhere near and as high in plant foods as we have today is something that we've invented for ourselves, because when you really think about it, all of our crops that we rely on, if you go back to where they originate from, they were all inedible. Nothing that you eat at the grocery store came from something that was edible. Like the edible produce and fruits and grains that our ancestors could have eaten through the majority of human history are way, way more scarce. than what
Do you
we're
have evidence
capable
to
of eating
support that
now.
assertion? Do you have evidence to support that assertion?
Yeah, the evidence I have to support that assertion is that we literally know that we, through selective breeding, have cultivated and changed foods over time, and that actually includes like almost everything that we eat.
Yeah, so there was no predecessors. For example, when we're looking at modern citrus fruits, the granddaddy of the citrus fruit, we can still find today. It just tastes, it's more of an acquired taste. And for example, a pomelo is closer to that than
Right,
an
they were
orange
all
would be.
less calorically dense, less nutrient dense. They tasted
Dude,
like shit.
pomelos are way more gangster than an orange. Have you ever had a pomelo versus an orange? Pomelos are sick. Like they're like huge, juicy.
And you're
They're
saying that
amazing.
this came from nature and not from selective breeding.
Yeah, but pomelos are newer. But the granddaddy is closer to a pomelo than it is to a modern orange, right? So it's not necessarily the case. And there's like, for example, bush fruits and like fruits in Africa that are hugely calorically dense. And so what you're saying just isn't supported by the evidence we have. So either provide a study saying conclusively that humans have eaten the majority of their calories from meat throughout the whole of our evolutionary process. So we basically were frugivores eating fruit all day, and then we one day came down from the trees and started like
I don't have to provide a
jumping
study
on.
because you just have to think about two things.
No, I don't
Like
want
you
to
have
think
to,
about anything. I want evidence.
all right, the evidence is in what I'm about to say, which
It's
is
not
that
because it's bullshit.
it's not bullshit.
Well, it is, dude, because we were frugivores. At what point? So we came down from the trees being frugivores, and then we suddenly started jumping on cows and biting into them with our
We were
incisors.
more adapted to eat fruit, so we were able to actually eat natural fruit back then when we were adapted like more that way when we
like
were
like we
actually living in trees.
we still are adapted to eat natural fruit. We still have amylase in our
We've been
saliva.
evolving
We still
we've been evolving to eat more and more meat for millions of years, for like 6 million years or something.
right. Can you demonstrate one anatomical change which enable? For example, can you demonstrate that humans cannot have hypercholesterolemia induced from animal food sources? Can you demonstrate that? Can you link one study to demonstrate that?
Well, like you said, the thyroid basically plays a major point in that, and like iodine deficiency is very common, and like fluoride also plays a role in like in basically it damages over time gradually the
So,
thyroid.
so do
Like
you have
there are
evidence
different
to
ways
support?
in which a human, like the human thyroid, could actually be in the majority of the population compromised in some way because
Oh,
they're
okay, so now I require evidence that um, that hypercholesterolemia only occurs
I'm not claiming that's a
in.
fact, so the burden of
Okay,
proof
so what
goes
you just
both
said,
ways.
so what you just said was irrelevant to our conversation. So either provide evidence of
And
anatomical
it doesn't even
changes
matter
away.
because that isn't the definition of a carnivore. Like
Right. So
just because the World Health Organization or whatever says that, if it goes against what a fucking carnivore is defined as, then it doesn't matter. They're just saying that without actually referring to the full understanding of what it means.
okay, so
Because
let
because
me.
there are because there are facultative carnivores, even if you don't use the percentage-based definitions, there are facultative carnivores that probably might have some issues with cholesterol as well. I haven't like looked up specific ones, but
No. The you've got a problem here because if you argue that we're facultative carnivores, again, facultative carnivores have amylase and the ability to digest carbohydrates, but only contingent on animal nutrient sources, right? So, like taurine, like that's why if you feed a dog a vegan diet without supplementary taurine, it will die or get ill long term. Facultative carnivores require absolutely animal foods in their diet, otherwise they get ill. I do not require animal foods in my diet. I haven't eaten animal foods for over a decade, right, 11 years now, and I am completely fine. So either provide evidence that I'm secretly dead, or you can't say that humans are facultative carnivores because it doesn't fit the
The
definition in
definition
terms
isn't
of
even.
biology.
The definition has nothing to do with not in some way, like being able to fucking, have like create a situation where you're basically creating a laboratory diet where you're able to artificially sustain yourself on an unnatural diet. Like that doesn't mean that it disproves that humans are carnivores or that dogs or cats aren't carnivores.
Dude, I don't eat a laboratory diet. I eat normal, healthy, natural, organic stuff that I can grow in the garden. Right. So let's wrap this debate up because it is going around in circles. So there's two pathways that you're trying to argue. I'll just summarize where we are in the debate for anyone who's listening or who's tuning in right now. So there's two pathways that you're trying to argue, and you're jumping between them. One pathway, you are redefining carnivore to include horses, and I'm saying, okay, you can do that, but then I'm not. That doesn't constitute a
I'm not
concession because
redefining
you're
it.
just
It
using
literally is a
proprietary language.
spectrum.
No. Let me get this point out. I'm just trying to say where we are in the conversation. So pathway A is using proprietary language of carnivory to redefine horses as carnivores.
Biased. That's a biased
Okay.
way of putting it.
Yeah, okay. Pathway B is you're saying that there's a spectrum between herbivory and carnivory, and because of X, Y, and Z traits in humans, we fall actually further closer to carnivores than herbivores. And so we can block off pathway A because that would not get you to a debate win because that's just delusion. Pathway B, you're trying to argue that we're closer anatomically or biochemistry speaking to carnivores than herbivores on some sort of spectrum. Maybe there's a midpoint of an omnivore or something, but we're sort of 70% the way to a lion. So we're not quite a lion, but we're sort of like more closer to a lion than we are to a horse. You're trying to argue this second pathway. The problem with that is I've provided you a very objective, clear cut, on or off, black and white way of seeing this. All carnivores cannot have hypercholesterolemia induced through dietary mechanisms. All herbivores do get hypercholesterolemia through dietary cholesterol.
That's not part of the actual definition of carnivore, though.
Right?
That's
No, but this
part of
is
something
something
that came later as part of some study.
No,
Like they literally just
not
said
some
that.
random study or something. No, this is well known, and this is something which differentiates for us, black and white, the anatomical, biochemical differences between herbivores and carnivores. This is one indicator that we can point to and say, oh, well, that just got super high cholesterol by eating animal foods in its diet. That's a herbivore. Oh, we can't raise the cholesterol value of this organism. It's a carnivore, right? So it's a black and white, very easy factor to determine
You know
whether
what else
something's
I
a
could go
carnivore or
into,
herbivore.
by the way, is I could also talk about like multiple different nutrients and why it's way, way more efficient, basically, for us to derive our nutrients, the bulk of our nutrients from animal sources, because when it comes to things like fatty acids and vitamin A, which you mentioned earlier, the conversion of these things is actually less efficient and actually you require fat in your system basically to even derive vitamin A from beta carotene.
Okay, what, 1 second. What's your marathon PR?
My
How
what?
fast can you run a marathon? How fast can you run a marathon?
How fast can I run a marathon? Like listing every single vitamin, basically. Like I don't know if I can do that very fast.
No, I mean, like, if you were to run a marathon tomorrow, like the Boston Marathon or something, you to run it tomorrow, how long would it take you to run it?
I have no idea.
Okay, probably slower than my time, and my time is pretty crap, right? I'm not a good runner at all, but my marathon time is 3.5 hours. If I ran a marathon tomorrow, maybe I wouldn't hit 3.5 hours because I haven't run for a while because I've been doing renovating work at my new house. But yeah, I could probably 3.5, like 4 hours. I could do 4-hour marathon tomorrow, and I haven't had any animal-based retinol for 11 years. So all of this blah 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 about this nutrient and that nutrient is
No, you can
irrelevant to
get
the
it.
debate and
You can
empirically
get
false.
vitamin A on a vegan diet. You just can't get as much.
Yeah,
Like
but I
it's
don't care
hard.
because
It's
my
hard to.
marathon time is better than your marathon time. So what? This is just a red herring. It's just not interesting to the debate.
All
So
right,
let's get back to the debate.
I'll eat twice as much meat as I do now, and I'll work out for 2 years, and I'll be able to lift more than you eating meat. Therefore, veganism is debunked. And you know what I mean? Like
No, what I'm saying
you
is,
run
what I'm
marathons.
saying
So
is,
if you're, why would you
no, what I'm
assume
saying
that
is,
I'm
I'm
a
clearly not
marathon
dying.
runner and eating
I'm
meat
not a
is
marathon
debunked
runner.
because
I'm just a normal guy. I'm just a normal guy. I'm not a marathon runner. Yet my marathon PR
how do you
is
know
3.5 hours.
how do you know what my level of athleticism is? Like you don't even know.
No, I don't know. But if you were to say anything, if you were to say, oh, I haven't run a marathon, or I couldn't run a marathon, or it would be slower than 3.5 hours, then we know that not. I'm saying I'm not saying in virtue of me being able to run a marathon, me eating is debunked or something. What I'm saying is in virtue of me being able to run a marathon in above average time, it means that I'm not dying, I'm not ill, I'm not nutrient deficient. Because if I was nutrient deficient, if there was any nutrient I was extremely deficient in and I was ill, right, then I wouldn't be able to run a marathon quicker than the majority of the population. That's what I'm saying. So, in virtue of me meeting some basic entry level benchmark of fitness, I can demonstrate that after 11 years of not consuming animal derived retinol, I have no nutrient deficiency. So everything you're saying about these nutrients is crap.
Great. So if you're a
It's
herbivore,
irrelevant to the debate.
Go do that in the middle of the woods somewhere. If you're a herbivore, pull that off after 11 years living off of berries in the forest. It's impossible to live that way without,
Yeah,
like,
but it's
literally, like
impossible
I've
to live
said.
off berries because berries are seasonal. So it's impossible to live just off berries in the forest. But
Exactly. Like
yeah,
that's an argument for
this is a
why
red herring.
humans have to eat carnivore in nature.
Yeah, dude, this is a red herring. Let's get back to the debate. I want to wrap up the debate because it's going around in circles now. Right, so there's two pathways. I'm going to ask you a question to close off pathway A, or based on the answer to the question, we can wrap up the debate here. Are horses carnivores? If a horse eats a bird, right, once in a YouTube video, is that horse a carnivore?
It depends which definition you use.
If you
If
use your
you can
definition,
say to this extent a horse is a carnivore, or you can just classify it as a herbivore because it's on that side of the spectrum.
but what one are you
You could
using?
say that you could
For the
say that
purpose of this
it's
debate?
for the purpose of this debate. I'm telling you what my answer is, which is it literally depends which definition you use.
Yeah, but you can't conflate the definitions. Choose
I
a
don't
definition
conflate
and
the
stick to it.
definitions. I personally go with the percentage one because I feel that it's more accurate. I think it's better to look at it as a spectrum. So in that sense, I would say that the horses lean heavily towards herbivore.
So, would you say that the horse is a hypocarnivore?
I would say that it could be defined that way.
Can you have such thing as a herbivorous carnivore?
Yes, based on those definitions, yes.
Okay, so based upon your answer there, that you can have a herbivorous carnivore, I would say that that would be the reductio for the debate. That you are saying something which is absurd. That most people, the understanding is not an appeal to popularity, because what I'm saying is the understanding of the
The
English
actual
language.
logic behind it is valid. It's not that it's absurd, it's that it's not understood by the general population. Don't conflate those two things.
Well, look, if your proprietary definition of something isn't understood by the general population, that's absolutely fine. But what I'm saying is, based upon the understanding of words, I gave an example earlier, like I can jump to the moon. But what I mean by jump to the moon is I can tie my shoelaces. Yes, I can tie my shoelaces, right? It's fine. If you want to use jump to the moon to mean tie your shoelaces, it's a weird way of saying it, but you can do that. That's absolutely fine. And you can do that all day long. But for the purpose of the debate,
if what the word carnivore is, the actual word itself is just something humans made up, which it basically is, then it really does just depend how you define it. So technically, I could define carnivore as a human, and if the word carnivore meant human, then that arrangement of symbols would mean that thing in whatever language. Therefore, like it's literally made up by
exactly.
mankind.
This is what I'm saying. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine. But when I accepted the proposition that humans are carnivores, I accepted it on the general understanding of the English language.
If
as
humans are
understood.
carnivores in a sense, then it's valid to say that humans are carnivores, even if you don't specify exactly what sense that is. If, like, in any sense, the word humans are carnivores is true, then I win the debate.
No, because if you accept the proposition, I can right. So if I make a proposition,
If there's no
I can jump
objective
to listen to what I say,
definition
dude.
for
Listen to what I'm
carnivore,
saying.
then it's arbitrary and I can define it however I want.
Yeah, dude. Listen to what I'm saying. If I made a proposition on the Arthuria server, I can jump to the moon, and you accepted the proposition to argue the negation of that proposition, that I couldn't jump to the moon. And then I said halfway through the debate, well, hold on. What I actually mean by jump to the moon is I can tie my shoelaces. Then you can say, "Oh yeah, but I believe that you can tie your
If jump
shoelaces."
to the
So you say,
moon
"Yeah,
means
in
you can
this
tie
sense,
your
you can jump."
shoelaces,
Dude,
then
just
yeah, you
listen
can
to
jump
what.
to the moon.
Just listen to what I'm saying, dude. Listen to the end of my sentence before you interject. Right. So if you accepted that based on the fact that I can jump to the moon, and you were going to argue that I couldn't jump to the moon because it's just impossible. But halfway through, I said, I actually meant I can tie my shoelaces. And then you said, okay, well, I believe that you can tie your shoelaces. Of course you can tie your shoelaces. So in that sense, you can jump to the moon in that sense, right? I'll grant you that you can jump to the moon in that sense. But in the sense that I accepted the debate proposition, you cannot jump to the moon on the basic understanding of the English language. And that's the problem that we're having here. The basic understanding in the English language, humans are not carnivores, and you can't have a herbivorous carnivore, and you can't have a horse which is a carnivore. You can't have a cow that's a carnivore, and all of that would be nonsense.
It
So
doesn't
based
matter
upon
if you understood what the debate title meant, if what I'm saying is actually technically true though. Like your misunderstanding of what I meant doesn't warrant, the claim that it's actually incorrect at
right,
all.
but your misunderstanding of me jumping to the moon doesn't warrant that my claim that I can jump to the moon isn't correct. So if you accepted the debate proposition that I
Yes,
can jump
if
to the
in
moon,
some language jump to the moon means tie your shoes, then jump to the moon means tie your shoes in that language. And if
right?
under
So
some definition carnivore describes a horse or a human or whatever else, then if you use that definition, then a horse is a carnivore.
right, so if we can understand, if we can base our
But there
understanding of the
is no
debate.
objective definition. Like there is no clear cut single way that you can say for sure that and just draw a firm line between what is and isn't a carnivore. Like
Okay,
there
right,
is no
yeah, okay. Well, I agree with all of what you said. Then, so does 1 + 1 equal 2? By the way, let's answer that. 1 + 1, does that equal 2 in base 10?
yes, 1 + 1 equals
Right. So
yeah.
you agree that 1 + 1 equals 2. But what I meant by 1 + 1 equals 2 is that you lose the debate, right? So you agree
Okay,
that you lose
so
the
you
debate.
may have meant that, but that doesn't also change the fact that 1 + 1 equals 2 means 1 +
No, but
1
it doesn't
equals
change the
2 in
fact that
English.
you
So
agreed.
if
You
under
agreed
your
that you lost the debate.
definition, if under the commonly accepted definition of carnivore, humans are not carnivores, then under that definition, yes, humans are not carnivores. But if there is no actual objective definition for carnivore that is based in the literal objective science, then then you can literally define it in any way you want. And also on top, like it's not exactly the argument that we're even talking about because it's not really a semantic thing or like trying to redefine what things mean in our language. It's really about there being no actual technical definition for carnivore that's clear cut, and scientifically the most accurate way of looking at it is as a spectrum, like I'm saying. So it's not, are you a carnivore or are you not, so much as how much of a carnivore are you. And in that effect, it's accurate to say that if you even have 1% carnivore, then you're a carnivore in the sense that you're a carnivore to that extent. Therefore, humans are carnivores.
Therefore, cows are carnivores.
And that doesn't even matter because that doesn't debunk humans being carnivores. If you want to call a cow a carnivore, that's fine with me.
Right, but if we're going to call cows carnivores, this is so unintuitive in the understanding of what we mean when we use these words.
Quantum physics is unintuitive.
Yeah, but that's a different context, right? So, it goes against what we know these words to mean so much that you're using proprietary language at this point. Do you agree that you're using proprietary language?
I agree that I'm using language that like a lot of people would understand what I'm talking about, and a lot of people wouldn't, because like I would say like the masses, yeah, they would listen to what I'm saying on the surface and think it sounds ridiculous at first, but if they really listened to what I'm saying, then a lot more of them would actually, I think, see what I'm saying.
But are you using proprietary language?
Proprietary to what extent? Like,
Is it your own definition of what carnivore is, or are you using
no, no, no,
biologically
no.
recognized
It's not.
definition?
It's not my definition of what carnivore is. It's literally like just a more nuanced understanding of what diet is in animals
So if I
than the
look,
typical just black and white thing.
so if I got like a biology textbook and I looked up carnivore, would it say horse there, or would it say human?
No, it wouldn't. It probably wouldn't say either of those things. But based on actually like looking at what it means in all contexts, like altogether, if you really consider what carnivory is, humans can be classified that way, and it's not a ridiculous thing to do.
Right. So if a human eats a carnivore diet and gets scurvy and dies, is that a carnivorous, anatomically adapted carnivore?
Well, if a human eats liver and eyeballs and gets vitamin C from that, like you can get vitamin C from animals, and also you need less if you're in ketosis. And I'm not saying that that's the optimal best way to derive energy, but if you're in ketosis or just eating less sugar in general, from what I've heard, you would actually need less vitamin C.
Even granting that, the ratio between the amount of meat that you would get from an animal and the size of the liver, and let's assume the tribe eating this animal, the ratio would be wrong. It would be the incorrect ratio of internal organs to get the vitamin C and all the stuff that isn't present in the meat. The ratio would be incorrect. You would have to kill lots of animals, discard all of the meat, and eat just the organs, right? So, so in terms of nature, you would have to do something which is unnatural. And you were talking about a vegan diet being unnatural, or humans
Well,
eating plant-based
humans in
diets being
nature,
unnatural.
they would eat a handful of berries here and there, and they'd eat an eyeball and a liver here and there. Like that's how they do it.
Yeah, if you plug that into chronometer, it won't work for you to get the full nutrient spectrum. Like just eating a bunch of sweet potatoes will get you a better nutrient spectrum than that. So in
No way,
terms of what
man.
you're trying to
Eating
argue
a bunch
now
of
with the
sweet potatoes is not going to get you like
yeah,
more.
punch it into chronometer, man. I've done all this already.
All right,
What
so why
what
don't
you're
you
arguing
punch
now?
in liver, berries, and eyeballs and compare that to a fucking sweet potato then?
Yeah, but it's different calories. You need to compare the amount of calories. But anyway, what you're getting at now doesn't even get you to your conclusion, because it would be unnatural to get the nutrient proportions that you're saying for the human diet in order to sustain. And the thing is, ketosis is not even like ketosis isn't even that healthy long term. Like there's been studies on this. It's not healthy long term. But I'm getting a bit sort of bored now. I'm sitting in the van. I want to get on with my day a bit, or my evening, more like. So let's wrap this up. What I see we're coming up against in this debate is, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that carnivore is sort of vaguely defined, and you think that humans fit into the category of carnivore more fittingly than some other category like frugivore or omnivore, right? And it would be legitimate if you would argue that using solely anatomical features. But we've gone through the anatomical features. I pointed out the hypercholesterolemia. I've pointed out all of the different anatomical features, like the teeth, like the urine pH, like the enzymes in the saliva, like all of the different colon transit times, and all of this. And it appears that we're much closer to frugivores than we are to carnivores. And then you're arguing that we're facultative carnivores, and I've pointed out how that could not possibly be the case, because facultative carnivores only have carbohydrate metabolism contingent on animal nutrients, but whereas humans can get all of the carbohydrate metabolism they want by not eating any animal foods at all. So that doesn't stick at all. So we're not obligate carnivores, we're not facultative carnivores. So the only pathway that you keep trying to go down, but you're jumping between different ones. But the main pathway that you're trying to go down now is to try and say that humans are hypocarnivores or mesocarnivores. But in that pathway, we're defining horses and cows as carnivores as well. And you're having to bite the bullet on saying that you can have a herbivorous carnivore. And so, if we go down this pathway, which is the pathway that you're trying to go down now, because all of the other doors have been shut to you, you're having to argue these bizarre things, and it's just down to the point of you using proprietary language. And you're on the border, you're inching over the edge of admitting that you're using proprietary language, but you're not quite there yet. Just concede that you're using proprietary language and we can end this debate.
So would you call the hyper carnivore, meso, hypo, all of that, would you call that proprietary language?
I would say it's used in a fringe way in the biology community, but
How do you know
it's
that? Like, do you know that if you didn't say that to an actual biologist, that they wouldn't like perfectly accept it and understand you?
right. But if you said that to a biologist, that a horse,
Can you prove to me with studies that actual biologists wouldn't agree to that? Can you show me the studies, please?
yeah, yeah, but all you're doing is quoting the Wikipedia page. Right, you haven't got a study. You haven't got a study which says that that's used or something. You're just
You've
quoting the
both made a
Wikipedia
lot of
page.
claims without studies. What are we gonna do? Like, what are we gonna do? Read whole studies to every, like, you know, like that's not what's gonna happen on a debate of this kind of
No,
format.
I can provide you with studies. You want me to provide you with studies? I'll provide
You're
you one
perfectly
study.
welcome to provide me with studies. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll provide you a study here. Hold on. A prepared one study by it's not the best one in the world, but I'll pop it in Saloon General. That's the one talking about how cholesterol and atherosclerosis, how it can't be induced in carnivores, but it can be in herbivores. Right. So yeah. So the hypocarnivore thing. Examples are the grizzly bear, the black bear. Right. So the bears. We're not talking about horses in this category, dude. All biologists would reject that a horse is a carnivore. You're using a proprietary definition. Just admit it, dude.
This is what an actual biologist would say. Yeah, they would say that a horse is a herbivore. They wouldn't say that a horse is a carnivore because it's on the herbivore side of the spectrum, but they would agree to the fact that it's a spectrum, meaning that if you're 4% carnivore, then you're partially carnivore. Like
Yeah,
they're,
but
you
you
know,
wouldn't say that a horse is a carnivore on that basis. You would say that they might eat 0.1% meat in
technically
their diet.
there is no like there is no point where you can say that something is a herbivore or a carnivore in and of itself. The only way that you can look at it that is in alignment with the actual observable reality that we live in is to say that it's a spectrum, because that's literally how it works.
Yeah, just like as I said, just like everything else in life, like having sex is a spectrum of what constitutes sex and what doesn't. Murder is a spectrum, what constitutes murder and what doesn't. There's so many things in life that constitute that are spectrums. But
No,
you know,
eating 1% meat is eating meat, but touching someone's leg is not having sex at all.
you know what I'm saying. It's the psoriasis paradox, right? So we can say, like for example, is a vegan who accidentally eats a bit of meat that was contaminated in his food now a carnivore or a meat eater? No, he's not. There is
There's
a
only
line,
the
but
degree to which you are or aren't a carnivore on a spectrum, and so the only way to not at all be a carnivore is to be 0% carnivorous by either not even falling on the spectrum or by being a 100% herbivore.
right. So by your definition, horses and cows are carnivores.
They are partially carnivorous if they consume animals as part of their diet.
Right. So this is the thing. If horses and cows, the typical hyper herbivores, are by your definition carnivorous, to whatever degree you are calling them carnivorous, if they're carnivorous, then you're using proprietary language. Admit that you're using proprietary language and we can end the debate.
I'm not using proprietary language because
Well,
it's literally
well,
like it's
then a horse is not a carnivore if you're not using proprietary language. If you're using non proprietary language, a horse is a herbivore and not a carnivore. Now, if you're saying that a horse is a carnivore, you're using proprietary language.
what makes it not proprietary language is the fact that it's literally not like it's known that there is no one like box in which you can put these things for each one. Like it's known that there's overlap. It's known that it's a spectrum in mainstream biology. It's not proprietary
Right.
anything.
So
It's
so
literally just
okay,
explaining more than just the surface level of what these words mean. That's literally all it is.
right. So in mainstream biology, is a horse a carnivore?
In mainstream biology, a horse can have a carnivorous diet to an extent.
Is a horse a carnivore in mainstream biology?
A horse is a carnivore to a certain extent, potentially. It can be.
No, it can't be.
It's not a carnivore in the sense that it's a carnivore rather than a herbivore. It's that it's 99% a herbivore and 1% a carnivore.
Can you provide me evidence of biologists calling horses percentages of carnivore?
Maybe somewhere I can dig it up on the internet, but it doesn't even
No,
matter
no. Can you
because
provide me evidence now in this debate? Now,
all right, the evidence that I can provide to you is that horses are capable of eating meat. Therefore, if meat is part of a horse's diet, then it is to that extent, however much it eats meat, whatever the ratio to meat to plant matter that it consumes, it is to that extent a carnivore.
I
Uh,
understand that's your definition. Can you provide me with a?
that is literally the only
No, that's
way
your
that you
definition.
can look at it
That
if you put it on a spectrum like
that's
that.
your
And
definition.
that's
Can you provide me a source in mainstream biology saying that a horse is carnivorous to a certain degree?
Can you provide me a source saying that there is no that eating a certain amount of meat doesn't make you carnivorous when it clearly does, because you're literally partially partaking in a carnivorous diet to an extent.
Yes, I can. If I go to Google and I type in horse, this is very mainstream. This is Google. So let's see if we get one with the diet that's going to come up.
And by the way, we can talk about horses all day, but even like that literally doesn't even prove anything because this
Okay,
is
so mainstream horses are part of the herbivore family. They only eat plant material. It's in the teeth.
It's very useful to call them herbivores because they are mostly herbivorous. They are mostly herbivorous, but being herbivorous doesn't mean you also aren't to an extent carnivorous.
Right. So I've Googled horse and I've found herbivore. That's very mainstream. I've provided you now with evidence.
Does it talk about carnivore? Does it talk about how herbivorous it is, or does it just say they're herbivores? It says they're herbivores because they're mostly herbivorous in their diet, but technically they have a mostly herbivorous diet. They're called herbivores because they eat mostly plants, but that doesn't mean that the other side of the spectrum doesn't exist. If you have an animal, regardless of whether it's a horse or not, just an animal in general that eats, let's say 20% meat or whatever else, then it is to that extent, it has a carnivorous diet. Part of its diet is carnivorous. And the definition, the most accurate definition basically of herbivore or carnivore and all that is basically just to what extent you fall where on the spectrum. Therefore, a herbivore can be also a carnivorous, which means it's not just a herbivore, it's a herbivore to X extent and a carnivore to X extent. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's a carnivore.
The debate proposition. The debate
Humans are
proposition was not
carnivores. So
that
if humans are 30% carnivores, then humans are carnivores. Not as much as they are herbivores, but that still means that part of what defines them is what they are is carnivore.
No, that's called sleight of hand. That's a sleight of hand, right? So the debate proposition was not that humans are capable of eating meat, and to the extent that they eat meat in a diet, then they're carnivores. That wasn't the debate proposition. The debate proposition was humans are carnivores, full stop.
A literal accepted definition of carnivore, one of the types of carnivores, and it's an accepted definition, it includes animals that eat mostly plants.
That definition is hypocarnivore, which is not going to get you to horses are carnivores, right? Because if you asked any biologist what hypocarnivore is, and if it includes horses, they will say that no, it does not include horses.
30% or less. Literally, using those definitions, you literally can say that herbivores are carnivores. And those are accepted definitions.
Which is why the definitions cannot be used in the way that you're trying to use them, because otherwise it gets you to say that a horse is a carnivore. And then if you say that a horse is a carnivore, at that point, you're using proprietary language. So either you're using proprietary language or you're not using proprietary language.
Okay, let's say everything I've ever said in my life is proprietary language. That doesn't change to what extent it's correct or incorrect. If I say something nobody understands, but it's correct, then it's correct.
Yeah, it's fine, but I just don't understand what you mean by that. And if I accept a debate proposition based upon the English language as generally understood, then that's the understanding that I accepted. I didn't accept some other understanding, just as if you accepted the debate proposition from me that I could jump to the moon, you wouldn't expect that actually means that I can tie my shoelaces. So either you're using proprietary language or you're not. If you're using proprietary language, then that's fine.
The reason why I'm not saying that.
If you're not using proprietary language, then you cannot possibly argue that a horse is a carnivore, because that's proprietary language. So it's not the case that you're not using proprietary language.
The reason why I'm not admitting or conceding that is because it's literally not true. Like if I said this if I explained my logic here to a biologist, a lot of them would probably agree with me. Like they would understand what I'm saying, and they would say yes. Like technically, there's no line in the sand. There's no actual line between these things that's like objectively known and clear cut, and everyone agrees like that doesn't exist, and they would agree
Okay,
that
right.
it's a spectrum.
So I wanna end the debate as soon as possible. So the way, and I'm not going to do it until I've got a concession. So the way we're going to do this is right now. I'm going to ask you if you cannot provide any examples of mainstream biologists or mainstream biology authoritative sources like textbooks saying what you're saying, that a horse can be a carnivore. If you can't provide me with a mainstream example of this before we end this debate, I'll wait, and you can find it if you want. I'll give you a few minutes. You can find it. If you can't provide that, then I'm assuming you're using proprietary language. Do you want to concede you're using proprietary language, or shall we wait and you can find a source?
Well, you can assume whatever you want, because that's literally just you assuming that. Like I don't
Right,
I don't
but we have to make progress on the debate because I want to wrap it up. So, are you going to provide an example of someone using the word carnivore in this way? That
I've
horses are
literally
carnivores?
used the literal definitions of carnivore to explain in every way
No, no, no,
possible
no,
why
no.
humans
That's
can
a
be
sleight of
classified
hand.
as
That's
carnivores.
a sleight of hand. That's a sleight of hand.
No, it's not.
Are you willing to provide a source, a mainstream source, that is saying
Why does it have to
that
be
horses
mainstream?
can be
Why do you
considered
why do you
carnivore?
value mainstream? Like, who cares if it's mainstream? Don't you care more about
Because
don't you care
I
more
care
about
about
the
the
facts
words that
than
everyone
like
understands.
how popular the opinion is?
No, how popular the understanding is. Because
I
if
don't
the
care how
understanding is
popular
not
the
popular,
understanding is, I care if it's the correct understanding.
right? If the understanding of a term is widely known, then it's not proprietary language. If the understanding of a term is not widely known,
So would you
that
say
is the
that any
definition of
language
proprietary
that's not
language.
known by laymen is proprietary language? Like
If
if
it's
like
if it's
like
not openly,
would you
no,
say
no,
that
no,
the
no.
word
I'm allowing
neutrino
you.
is
Wait. I'm allowing you to provide an example of this usage that is that's used in the academic community. So it's not laymen. You don't have to provide a layman example.
here's the example. A hypocarnivore, less than 30%, with the balance consisting of non-animal foods such as fruits, other plant material, or fungi. That's a
Right, from
mainstream
the Wikipedia
definition of
page.
carnivore, which says an animal that eats less than 30% meat is a carnivore.
Right, that's from the Wikipedia page, and then it goes on to talk about bears, and it goes on to talk about literally like grizzly bears, right? So it doesn't mention in that article that a horse or other obviously herbivorous animal is a carnivore. It doesn't do that because it's a technical definition that's
That's
used
because
in a
we
specific way.
classify these things out of a convenience. Out of convenience, no one needs to fucking call a horse a carnivore. Like that doesn't have any real relevance unless we're having the exact debate we're having right now, which is that technically it's a spectrum, and if an animal is 1% carnivorous, then to that extent it's a carnivore, and there's no real line between herbivore and carnivore.
Right. So going back to what we just said, then provide me with the source saying what you're saying now, that it's perfectly acceptable to say that horses are carnivores. Provide me with that source, or that cows are carnivores. Provide me with that source. Otherwise, you're using proprietary language and we can end the debate. So please do that now.
Feel the need to do that, so I'm going to decline that, because I've literally explained using the actual definitions of what these things are, what they mean.
Okay. So you've been unable to provide a source of that usage of of this terminology. So I'm considering it proprietary terminology. In this sense, if I was to accept a debate proposition that was secretly proprietary terminology, I saw at face value that it was just common language. I accepted it, but it
Based
turned
on the
out to
common
be
definition,
not common
based on the
language. It
common
turned out to be
definitions,
proprietary.
humans are
Then that
carnivores.
is not then that it's not possible that you could that you could get that over the line with me, because that's proprietary language, and I'm not having proprietary language when I
Based on
accepted
common language, humans are carnivores.
a normal language, a normal, widely understood language version of the proposition.
Humans only require meat to survive, and
There's nonsense.
also,
How
and
about sailors who died of scurvy? Look, let's not get back into this. But you're using proprietary language. I've demonstrated you're using proprietary language. We've gone round in
I've
circles. You're
demonstrated I'm
failing
not.
to provide me with a single example, right? You're failing to provide me with an example to demonstrate it's not proprietary language. You failed.
I don't
And you're
rely on
refusing now.
mainstream sources as much
You're,
as you. I rely
yeah,
on
yeah, you're
logic and
refusing.
empirical
You're
evidence
refusing.
rather than where the information is coming from.
You're refusing to provide a single example of that usage. So your usage is proprietary
The
language.
example is in the definition. It's literally in there. Like it,
No.
like that's literally
No,
the
you're
usage.
using it in a
of it
proprietary
is what
way.
it is.
You're using it in a proprietary way, and you failed to provide a single example of it being used in this way. And you would have to commit yourself, as you've already agreed multiple times,
If 10% of
that
an
you would
animal's
have a
diet
herbivorous
is
carnivore.
comprised of animal products, does that mean that it's 10% carnivorous, that its diet is 10% carnivorous? Yes, it does. Therefore, that animal is 10% a carnivore.
It doesn't matter if you say 10% carnivorous, because that animal, for example, a horse, is
It's
not
a
a carnivore.
carnivore. It's 10%
It's
a
not a
carnivore,
carnivore.
which means that it's
No,
a
it's not.
carnivore.
Yeah, no, it's not a carnivore. You might say that
Carnivore is
it's
part of
5%
what it is. You can define it that way. It's perfectly valid to look at it that way.
You might say it's 0.1% carnivorous. You might say it's 0.5% carnivorous, but you're not going to define this organism as a carnivore. This is proprietary language. You failed to demonstrate one single usage of that in the literature.
You could drop the whole thing and just look at it in terms of to what extent something is this or that. So like technically the words herbivore and carnivore, you could look at it in such a way that you just get rid of those entirely. You could literally make up new terms then and just literally completely change how to look at it based on a spectrum. So at most you could say that carnivores don't even exist. Like you could say that herbivore and carnivore don't exist and it's just a spectrum, but you can't say that something is not a carnivore based on insisting that it has to be what is commonly understood as a carnivore or a herbivore.
You're using proprietary language. You failed to provide me with a single example to demonstrate it's not proprietary language, and I'm now bored of the conversation. I generally like to push for concession, and I have tried to push for concession, but you're uncooperative and refusing. You're refusing to cooperate in getting to the point of the debate where you would be able. I'm giving you a chance. I'm giving you a chance. Don't stop interrupting, dude. It's getting really annoying. I'm giving you a chance to provide an example. You're refusing to provide that example. You're using proprietary language. You're failing to provide an example, refusing to provide an example, and that's all I can do. You're not being cooperative. You will not concede anything. So we're going to have to put it to a vote because I can't sit in the van all day. I won't. It's dark. I will want to go in the house, unpack the van. So I've run out of time. I would normally push for a concession, but it's getting to the point where I'm just bored of this conversation now. It's going on too long, and so we just by default we're going to have to put it to a vote because I can't be bothered anymore. But yeah, in terms of the technicals of the debate, you're just refusing to cooperate at this point. So Stone, we're going to have to end it there.
Okay, that sounds good. I think it's a good spot to end it. So, was that your closing statement, Footsoldier?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, awesome. Did you want to have a closing statement, Pickle, before I wrap it up?
I think I've said about everything that I need to say.
Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you both so much for debating. I always appreciate you guys taking the time to debate on here. So now I guess